When you're talking about convergence, there are, well, probably tens of thousands of examples. The cockroach walks using 6 legs. My dog, our dog, I beg your pardon, uses 4 legs. But in point of fact, when you look at both the mechanics of walking and also the neural arrangements which fire the limbs in the cockroach and in the dog, they are the same. So that suggests to me that wherever you are in the world, if you're going to have an organism with limbs, it's going to use the same system. And the same thing applies to flying. That's evolved many times. The same thing applies to swimming. So there's a degree of predictability in evolution. As you're a scientist, one is trying to make sense of the world. So one aspect is, well, how do we actually make sense of the world at all? Why does it appear to have some rational structure to it? What is underlying this whole process? What does it all mean? When I came to Cambridge and worked on the Burgess Shale, I became very interested in the Cambrian as a whole. The Cambrian was, if you like, a time of immense diversification. And at that stage, we thought perhaps that the diversification of evolution was so extreme, all sorts of different sorts of animals, they were just a random outcome of the evolutionary process. But subsequently, I began to think about it a bit more.
What we've got here is an animal called an ichthyosaur, and then you can just see the eye. Of course, would have been a camera eye, which would be very much the same construction as ourselves.
When I look at people, I'm using my camera eye. If I'm diving in the sea and meet an octopus, that octopus will look at me with its camera eye. Although there are subtle differences between the octopus eye and our eye, fundamentally, they do exactly the same thing. But the octopus is pretty closely related to the earthworm. We belong to the vertebrates. From different starting points in the tree of life, you end up with an almost identical solution. They're convergent.
So all in all, this is a thing which looks remote and ancient and extinct, but actually there are many, many similarities to animals which exist in present-day oceans. They're convergent.
In principle, the number of biological combinations which you could envisage is unbelievably large. It's a stupidly big number. However, when we look at convergence, it suggests that the number of solutions which actually works is an infinitesimally small fraction. And that, to me, suggests there might be, if you like, an underlying template of organization. I do remember when I started to prepare my major book on convergent evolution, it wasn't really a plan to do anything. It was just a sort of driving fascination in trying to interpret these fossils. And almost all of this is based on other people's work. It has to be. And I suddenly realized that if I was going to complete this work, it was going to be a real slog. Just concentrating on reading hundreds and hundreds of papers and then bringing together something like an eye in the octopus, something like a gecko pad, something like an enzyme carbonic anhydrase, something like the olfactory system of the fruit fly. And then trying to find, if you like, a commonality, which we would now call convergent evolution. Convergence would suggest that on any Earth-like planet, my sense was something like a human is going to evolve, almost inevitably. But I've changed my mind. At least today, there's no report of any of those extraterrestrials which should fulfill this prediction. I've become increasingly interested in the reality, as I would see it, of what we call human uniqueness. As a human, as a scientist, as an amateur theologian, I see something very distinctively peculiar about what humans are, even though the evolutionary continuity is self-evident from the fossil record and is self-evident from molecular biology. But when I consider how we became self-aware in the way which I don't think animals are self-aware, they know themselves, they know what other people are doing, there's no dispute about that, but they don't have that added thing we have. No animal will ever become an actor because no animal can ever step into the shoes of another one. that aspect of what makes us human may have some scientific basis, but science doesn't have anything useful to tell me about that at all. That's not what we are. I buy far too many books and there's never enough time to read them all. In a sense, I am lucky. I've always been intensely curious about things, and that curiosity, thank goodness, shows no signs of evaporating. It's just a sheer pleasure of reading through these things and trying to formulate a point of view which has not been previously arrived at least in the way in which I want to try and persuade people. When I look at the books I've written, I have a very odd feeling that I didn't actually write them. The actual donkey work, the working through the thing to establish all the links in the argument, is often several generations' occupation. But the thing was there beforehand. There may, in fact, as other people have argued, be an almost endless set of deeper investigations. There's no reason to think that knowledge somehow will reach some sort of terminus. It may be infinite, and you can find that terrifying, I do on a Tuesday, and deeply encouraging on a Friday when I have a gin and tonic. It's the sense that really one is just scratching the surface of what one may one day know. And that's all one can ask for, no more than that.